Hey, y'all, and welcome back to our Easter livecast. And you know the spiel. We're going to talk politics and culture and theology and everything and all things in between. I'm Christopher Van Hall, author of Reborn Again, Crucifying Christendom and Resurrecting a Radical, also a co-founder of the Greater Purpose Brewing Company and pastor of Greater Purpose Community Church. And y'all, today is the day. It's Easter. This is like the church Super Bowl, but it's Holy Week, and I gotta be honest, I've been struggling this year really to get into any kind of holiday mood for Easter. I've been prepping myself for this day for weeks, and that's a strange sensation for me because typically Easter liturgy is my favorite to talk about. That and Pentecost are just my two favorite seasons, and I'm just not getting into the mood, which is strange because the symbolism behind the concept of new life and death not having the final word, those things we always hear every year at Easter, it's such an uplifting and hopeful annual message, and it's just not doing it for me this year. Easter's just not hitting the same this year, fam. And there may be several contributing factors for this from my own personal life. I mean, first off, our church still cannot gather safely in person due to COVID-19. And that bothers me because we have not been together in the same space physically, all of us, for over a year. A year. And if you're one of our church members, if you're watching this, if you're listening, y'all, I miss the shit out of us corporately, the big us. I miss getting together with y'all and sharing a meal with y'all. Click like if you agree right now, because I'm sure I'm not alone in this. But it isn't just missing my congregation this year, because there is a variety of other reasons why I think I'm being a poopy pants. I've had pandemic fatigue, as I'm sure many of you have as well. And the reality of this growing, what started as MAGA, now it's become QAnon, cultist, hijacking the Christian faith, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, although I appreciate the many ministers that are calling it out. But it leads to more spiritual depression, and it's just constant. But friends, I'm also struggling. And I just want to be real with you, because that's the one value that I've always brought to these talks is I want to be real and open about where I'm at spiritually. And I got to tell you, lately, can't believe I'm saying this. I'm not sure that I believe in God anymore. I've been saying for the past few years that I'm mostly spiritually agnostic, but now I think I may have actually crossed the line to being actually agnostic, like on paper. I mean, ethically, I'm still a follower of Jesus' teachings. I still read the Bible, study scripture, study church history and things like that. But that's about it. It's not like I believe necessarily in the spiritual aspect of any of those things anymore. And this year, because of that, it's bittersweet, because the story of resurrection, though powerful on its own, even just as a metaphor, for me, this year, I no longer believe that there is any possibility that the resurrection was a literal occurrence. In fact, in the book of Mark, the most historically accurate version of the Gospels, the original manuscript actually stops before it mentions proof of the resurrection. The scriptures say this: "And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the heavy stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?' And when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed, justifiably. But he said to them, 'Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, Tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So the women went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's it. That's where the original Gospel of Mark ends. And all the other stuff that comes after that, the Great Commission, all that fun stuff, that's later additions to the text. We actually don't have proof that they saw a resurrected Jesus in the original manuscript at all. No proof whatsoever. No angel in this version, just a young man in a white outfit that told a group of women that Jesus was raised. And they were too afraid to tell anyone what they saw. And even then, if that story is true and they didn't tell anyone, well, that's obviously false, because otherwise it wouldn't have been written into the gospel. Now, for those of you that do not identify as Christian, this message may simply cause a level of intrigue for you. Like, I didn't know that. That's interesting. But for others, and for someone like myself that has devoted their entire career, and it's all hinged on the belief of a literal resurrection, like focused the entirety of their career. I'm going on 20 years, and I'm not alone in this. Y'all, when you come to this conclusion, it's a hard pill to swallow. One thing that's not discussed often enough, at least in the mainline church and on the progressive left, is how difficult faith deconstruction can be and how hard it is on an individual. I liken the process to mourning, because the more deeply you dive into the scriptures and historical and contextual understandings of the text from a scholarly perspective, the more you may proportionately distance yourself from religion, temples, rituals, tradition, and beliefs in miracles like the resurrection no longer exist for you. And in a way, part of yourself dies. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, think of it like pruning dead branches from a magnolia tree. But it's worth mentioning that even though cutting away dead twigs is necessary, it temporarily leaves a once lush and beautiful tree bare. And at times, that's exactly how I feel. Because so much of what I used to believe and used to be has been cut away. And I'm still growing into this new person. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that part of my deconstruction journey. When preaching, I often posture myself as someone who's certain of what I proclaim about specific things. And regarding communal ethics of inclusion and justice, that's mostly true. I am pretty certain where I stand on those things. But I have to present things with certainty that don't fall in those categories, because people want certainty and they follow strength, and everyone is looking for hope. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to give people hope. But the truth is, I'm far from certain about spiritual matters these days. I just don't know. But the thing that is in my mind constantly is a question. And the question is this: what if this life, what if this, what if that's all there is? And this may seem like a harmless question to those outside the Christian faith, and those of you that join us that are more atheistic or agnostic in your beliefs already. But for those that devoted their careers to ministry, years to praying and studying and fasting and reading scripture, and that poured their very blood, sweat, and tears into cultivating worship spaces while maintaining traditional worship services like Easter, this could very well be the most terrifying question that we've ever asked ourselves. And fear doesn't make our deconstruction any less necessary. Nor the process of questioning invalid. I would argue that embracing these difficult possibilities as we wrestle with our faith identity, it's vital. But that doesn't mean that the process is painless. And we need to acknowledge that. Yet, in my pain, in my searching, in my desperation to find truth, there is a glimmer of hope. There is a spark of belief left in my spirit. For the only conclusion regarding the existence of God that I have found is that if, and it's a big if there is no higher power, then what faith that remains must be in each other, especially since we can't prove or disprove the existence of God. And that may sound encouraging to you. That sounds like a very Tony Robbins-esque thing kind of say, but it shouldn't sound encouraging, at least not yet anyway. Because based on what I've seen with my own eyes, what I've regrettably done with my own hands and continued to do, the mistakes I continue to make, and what our history tells us within its pages is that humanity currently isn't remotely worth putting our faith in at all, at least not yet. The evidence of inerrant goodness from our species remains to be seen from a macro perspective, and our corporate inability to grasp justice, goodness, and fairness seems impossible to escape, while somehow we remain tragically committed to the demise of our species and even our biosphere. So, friends, I want you to know that in this process of wrestling, just to be honest, and I'm reminded of this Easter, I no longer place much stock in religion, especially in tradition, and definitely not in rituals. But what remains, that hope I was talking about on this bare tree that was once a soul, it's all my hopes. And they rest in each and every one of you. Every single one. Because if we wish to make this world beautiful, just, and merciful, then in the end, we are all we've got. And the possibility for our social evolution, no matter how grim, it's worth believing in and it's worth fighting for. We, collectively, are all we truly have, and we are all we're ever going to get. And it's high time that we started acting like it. So no resurrection message this year. Let's leave Jesus in the tomb this year. Let's feel the weight of the finality of this public execution, because that's what it was. A public execution from an ancient police state. And the verses about resurrection were in all likelihood just a way for the Romans to kind of wash their hands of the horrible murder of Jesus that they committed publicly. They were like, well, Christians can't blame us Romans for Jesus' murder. We obviously only killed him a little bit. I mean, 3 days later, he just popped back up out the hole and fine, fresh as a daisy. And by the way, this is also why the other gospels tend to blame Jewish peoples for Jesus' murder, so they can shirk that responsibility and they can scapegoat the Jewish people, the very people that they were oppressing. They're like, well, the people that are being persecuted by our military occupation and that we butcher publicly for giving even a glimmer of insubordination asked us nicely to kill Jesus. I mean, I guess we better do what they say, even though they have no real tangible way of inciting a violent uprising that's going to last more than a moment. I mean, I guess we better kill this nice guy, Jesus, over there, because, well, we don't want these folks to be mad at us and not invite us to, God forbid, their birthday parties. Am I right there, Jim? Hey, Bob, bring me some wood and bring the big nails. No, the bigger ones. We should probably get some thorns, too. It's ridiculous, all right? Of course, Rome controlled the narrative and wrote themselves as innocent and postured themselves as blameless because they hijacked the faith. And that's what empires do. They hijack narratives. Look at what our government did to Fred Hampton. And if you don't know who Fred Hampton is, worth a Google. It's horrific. And then far-right Republicans want to clutch their pearls when we mention that America has a racist past. I mean, this week with the trials in session, we could even point to George Floyd's murder as proof that racism is literally baked into every corner of our society. Regardless of the outcomes of these crimes against humanity, there's never going to be real justice for George Floyd, regardless of the outcome of this trial. George Floyd will never feel the sun on his face again. He will never laugh. He will never taste a home-cooked meal or embrace his lover ever again. And regardless of whether or not his murderer is convicted, and make no mistake, he should be fucking convicted, there can never be justice for what was taken from George Floyd. Ever. And sadly, there's no mystical resurrection for innocent victims like George Floyd or great leaders of activism and racial justice or social justice like Fred Hampton. There's never going to be a resurrection for these people, and their lives were taken from them. I mean, their stories live on, but their existence was extinguished at the hands of injustice. What if the same thing was true for Jesus? What if this rebellious, nonviolent, subversive rabbi was tortured, mocked, humiliated, brutalized, and slain, and he didn't return from the grave 3 days later? What if he didn't rise again? What if he isn't coming back like many of us in the Christian faith hope to believe? And what if the only thing that is being currently focused on by the church are mythical stories about heaven and the afterlife? And what if we're just telling each other those things to inject hope into our minds to help us cope with this unjust society and this broken world? What if that's the reality? Because based on my studies, though I cannot be certain, it's more than a possibility, friends. So why stay in ministry? Why believe in anything if there's nothing? And the answer is this: regardless of whether humanity deserves my faith, and with or without proof for the existence of a divine being or the resurrection, faith in humanity is the only real shot we have that's measurable and attainable to conquer hell on earth and see heaven here and now. So on this Easter Sunday, as we take of this bread that is broken, and as we drink from a cup with wine poured out that represents the butchered body of our ancient inspiration and teacher, let us remember the tragic demise of this troublemaking Palestinian rabbi who wouldn't take the life of his enemy, but was certainly willing to give his last breath for the cause of liberation, knowing that a magical resurrection was not in the cards for him or in the realm of possibilities. So friends, today, rather than focusing on an afterlife or being raised from the dead, I want to encourage you to live each precious moment that you have as if it is the last you will ever experience, because it very well may be. But I want you to take heart, because the inevitability of death, it sounds grim, but it gives this temporary life, and it gives our experience with struggle and this harsh reality, it gives it more meaning than resurrection or heaven ever could. Because each second that we are conscious in this life is a gift, and it could all end like that. And even though this life is finite, justice, I believe, is still worth pursuing. And those who have sacrificed those precious hours in their momentary existence for a cause bigger than themselves should be remembered, and their names should be immortalized, because greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends, or her friends, or their friends. And if we're willing to invest our tiny momentary blips of consciousness for the quality of life for all those who would come after us, then I have to believe, and I have to put the entirety of my faith in that is how love can win. Because it's the only salvation in which we can be certain is possible. Until next week, love y'all. No justice, no peace. Grace and peace. Happy Easter.
And now, may the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you in healing this wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it lead you through this world seeking the justice it demands for you and for others. And may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. Grace and justice to you.